panel will be moderated by Mr. Viswa Sadasivan, CEO of Strategic Moves. And the panelists are, of course, two of our speakers, Peter as well as Chris, as well as Mr. Lagerwij, got that right? Senior Director of Strategy, and I spent the whole afternoon doing that. Senior Director for Strategy and New Business Development at Philips, as well as Mr. Devadas Krishnadas, Managing Director of Future Moves. I'd like to now invite the panelists up onto the stage, and then I'll invite Viswa to introduce the panelists as well as the panel session.
I hope you don't mind if I don't sit. I have a lot more energy when I stand. And when I saw the two speakers just now, it was so clear to me that when you stand, there's a lot more energy and vibration, right? You can't imagine what I'm talking about because you're seated. One of the things that struck me when I listened, in a captivated manner to the two speakers, both Peter as well as Chris, is that they still have that child in them active. Do you not agree with me? There's that childlike nature inside them. The slight mischief, especially in you, Chris. I can imagine how mischievous a boy you were growing up, And the point here is, you can't have disruptive technology if you don't have a certain disruptive streak in you. The challenge that many societies face, I feel, is that we've become so systematized and so organized and so predictable that you lose the very essence that is needed, in my view, for the kind of change that is necessary in the decades down, which is challenging and questioning status quo. And that in itself is a huge challenge for a highly organized and successful state like Singapore. It's a challenge that we have to address. Otherwise, we will continue to talk about tweaking and not making quantum leaps in imagination. And without the kind of quantum leaps that we are forced to come to terms with in both Peter's and Chris's presentations, I think it's going to be a lost cause. You would have heard of the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. But you know what the problem is with necessity? Most of us don't realize that there is a necessity. Because many human beings, many societies go through a long period of time in a state of denial until the problem hits you right between the eyes, by which time it's too late. So the question I'd like to ask the panelists is, it's easier said than done. Innovation, we've heard the word innovation being articulated by everybody and their mother. Frankly, I get irritated when I hear certain words like innovation, ownership, and so on. These are motherhood statements, but what the hell do they mean?
So I irritated you big time.
You irritated me big time, okay? Usually professors irritate me a lot. Except for Professor Channing. But the question is, if innovation is obviously the solution, why are we in the state that we are in the world? The simple answer to that probably is that common sense is not as common anymore, because we're all into systems and processes. So I'd like to ask you, what appears to be the key impediments to common sense solutions in this great, beautiful world that we live in? For starters, let's just talk about Holland and Singapore. Why don't we listen to people we haven't heard so far? Okay. Right? Jan?
Hello? Yes? Okay. No, I think innovation, it's an interesting topic whereby we say future developments which improve our lives are basically on the slate to be developed, to be brought forward to our living situations, to most of our habits, to most of our impediments as well. So I guess when we look at what happens with innovation and why it doesn't come to a success, it's because many of the elements don't come together at the right time. We have areas such as policy, we have areas such as financial modeling, we have areas such as regulation, which all don't seem to come together at the right time, and therefore the innovations that we develop don't seem to make any financial sense, don't make any economic sense or any health benefit either. So what we've seen in the past is that many of the innovations tend to wither and die because they were either too early or too late. And we've also seen that government stimulation and government support of many of the innovations doesn't make it through to policy and standards. So when we, if I just also look at Chris's presentation, focused very much on aging and on solutions which are supposed to increase our quality or improve our quality of life. Many of those situations or many of those inventions have already been invented either long ago or are still slated to be invented. Whereas if the triangle doesn't come together of economic benefit, support from government institutions, and from a technological standpoint, then it doesn't seem to make any sense. So I think that's what impedes us most.
Well, Leo Tolstoy once commented that everybody talks about changing the world, but nobody talks about changing himself. And I think the major impediment, the most important impediment, is a lack of imagination. A lack of imagination on the part of decision makers, on the part of political leaders, on the part of even common citizens. Let me get practical about what a lack of imagination means. First of all, most of us suffer from something called hyperbolic discounting. That is, we value the short term over the long term. And you need imagination to be able to invert that. You need to be able to see what is going to happen 20, 30, 40 years and ask yourself, what can you do about it now? The second thing about imagination is it's required to be able to allow you to see how you can do things differently than you're doing now, because we're all prisoners of path dependency. We think this is how we are now, this is how it took us to so long to get here, how can we be different? And so you can't make those quantum leaps unless you really have the power of imagination. The third is, you need imagination to find different ways of working together, because the problems in front of us are multidimensional and they have scale. And so no country is going to be able to tackle this together. And the capabilities to deal with the problem, to engage the problem, are distributed and diffuse. And so we need networks and collaborations. And events such as this, bringing together everybody, and the kind of projects that Chris and Peter are working on, are perfect examples of network and collaborations bringing benefits. But we need many, many, many more of these. And one real hope I have is that Singapore acts as a node to bring networks and collaborations together, and our entire city becomes a pilot city for what may be possible in other urban centers around the world.
Okay. All right, thank you. It's still on? Yeah, it is. Well, many things have been said already by the previous speakers, so maybe I can add just two things. Like your introduction said already, maybe we need more children at the governmental level, right? To make things work, because they're very creative. That's one thing. I like to work with young people, actually. So, the second thing is that it reminds me to a saying of Winston Churchill. He said, what two big things, what major things do we need to really implement changes? And he said, we need a plan and we need less time. And, but we have a plan, I think, and we have very little time. So I don't understand what's holding us actually to implement the things.
Those are great identification of impediments. There's a litany of impediments. There's perhaps a suite of impediments that all are coupled, and that's why it's such a difficult problem. I'll point out maybe a couple others that that are part of this litany of lists. One is better models. Do we really understand cities? I would liken it to a metaphor, an analogy to healthcare. If we look at the history of healthcare in the human body, there was a lot of folklore. There were a number of doctors that really did not understand the anatomy, how the body worked, and it took a long time and it took a lot of effort to gain that understanding, to bring science and the social aspect together so we understood healthcare so much better. Well, now imagine that in our cities. Could you imagine that we come up with better models of urban metabolism, come up with better models that give us metrics and insights into the heartbeat? And once we do that, maybe we can start talking about exercise programs for our city so that they are sustainable, like we want our bodies to be sustainable. Maybe we can talk about surgeons that can come in and quickly repair aspects of cities in a very short period of time. But we need these models and this understanding perhaps before we get there, or maybe it'll just be folklore, or maybe it'll just be guesswork. Another impediment that I think is really important is people. If we look at people in cities that are making decisions that are engaged in the sustainable problem, it is a very small percentage of the inhabitants of the city. How do we bring these groups together? How do we employ them and really galvanize them so that this becomes important? And it's education. It's the ecosystem. I won't use the word innovation, Viswa. All right? But it's about how do we connect those people up. I don't have an answer to that one. I'm an engineer. But together with our social scientists at the interface, maybe we can come up with some very, very inventive solutions.
Oh, great. You have a question?
Yeah, we'll make a small interruption.
Yeah.
Minister would like to love to stay with us, unfortunately she's in another engagement.
Oh, is it something I said?
Before you said it.
I apologize on behalf of all Singaporeans. Thank you very much for being here, Minister. Thank you. Okay, so coming back to the discussion. Chris, I like the point you made about getting people involved. It's easier said than done, right? Sometimes when societies are very organized and very efficiency-driven, right? It goes back to the point that Jan made about policies. It doesn't translate to policies. But sometimes when things translate to policy very fast, you don't actually necessarily go through the process of getting a strong enough buy-in from the ground because you're going for quick efficiency, right? So I would imagine that a country that is very well organized, a city-state like Singapore, may suffer a little bit from time to market. Getting things done very fast. But in the process, one of the things that could suffer is that you don't necessarily carry the ground with you and you don't necessarily change the culture and attitude that is necessary from what you said in the long term, right? That's a trade-off. But on the other hand, you have also societies where there's absolutely, policy making has no rudder, right? It's going all over the place, there's no direction, and then you have 1,000 flowers blooming, but nothing is actually happening. So either extreme is bad, either extreme is extremely challenging. So how do we find that balance in societies, right? Maybe I'll ask the think tank person to start so that you guys have a bit of time to think.
I think one of the ironies in life is that you can know what you need to do and you still can't do it. And that's because life isn't as simple as a simple biochemical exchange at the cellular level. Societies are complex organizations that are prisoners of their politics, of their demography. But what we do need, under all societal conditions and in any societal form, are really good leaders. And if you have one thing your society is going to concentrate on trying to do, it is to try to generate those kinds of good leaders. Great followers are fantastic, but then you go into the rudder situation. Weak leaders will get you policies but won't carry the ground. So great leaders are a non-negotiable requirement for change to be able to happen, whether it's good change or bad change, mind you, but change to happen and to happen early. Because good leaders can communicate, can conceive, and can construct a mechanism to go forward. But I'd like to add another caveat to the problem, which is that when we look at the future, our tendency is to think in linear terms between here and now and how do we get there. And so we're very concerned about finding the solutions because the solutions tend to be unformed or malformed or partly formed, but the problem may be very well defined. What we have to understand is that going from here to then, when the solutions are incomplete, but the problem's definition is complete, is part of the risk that you take. And so learning to mitigate risk is an important policy capability. And the way to do that is to have that distributed capabilities around the world, not just located in yourself. Break the problem down into smaller units. Take the risk to pilot. Apportion risk so that you can learn to extract value even from failures and redistribute the value that you've got into ongoing programs. I think these are all skill sets in decision making that allow us to look at the problem not as fail or success, but as iterative successes that build up to a larger gain that we have to have, because the success we eventually want has to have scale, it has to have structure, and it has to be systemic. But your solutions don't have to start out on those parameters. And I think the examples given by both these great gentlemen are really illustrative of how you can start small and then build upwards, and how you can collaborate and cross-pollinate. So, yeah.
Peter, I saw you nodding. Well, I hope you're not trying to avoid falling asleep.
But I'm doing my best to stay awake. I'm doing my best to stay awake. No. Yeah, well, exactly, because I believe in these showcases, these pilot cases very much. And I was just elaborating on your question a bit, and I thought, well, everything is so economically driven, right? So I was wondering if the iPhone is economically driven, if Facebook was started because of the economical benefit, and I don't think so. I think people believe in something, and sometimes they need a little help or a little luck. But if you truly believe in something, and that's why we need these leaders that have a vision and truly believe in things to change. But if you truly believe in something, you can do it. And therefore you need maybe to show to the world in these little pilot showcases. And not everything should start with the business case, I think. And so that was why I was nodding, because I truly believe this is the way to go.
It's an excellent point coming from a business. It's an excellent
Sure.
point, because the fact that not everything needs to start as a business proposition. Sometimes imagination, great ideas are an end in itself. It doesn't always have to translate into economic value proposition. That's the point. It's a great point. Many of us should start reflecting on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think adding a little bit to how we define the problem and how we then look for solutions, I think one of the things we need to keep clear is that understanding the problem is one thing, but letting society loose to go and find the solution is probably the best way to do that. The leadership of that will then be entrepreneur groups, or the government should stimulate entrepreneurs to be there. There should be tax incentives for them. They should be able to create solutions to the problems without thinking of a definition of how to go and solve it. And everyone should be allowed to go into that. I mean, you know, I refer to the X Prize, which was that first endeavor to go for $1 million up into space and come back and successfully turn that around. That was obviously a non-viable business model for anyone at the time. However, what it spawned afterwards in the decades following that has been amazing, with what's already been mentioned, Richard Branson trying to go up to space and trying to solve things. I think if we look at the pillars is universities, entrepreneurs, corporations like Philips, and as well the government has to really put a lot of effort into freeing up where solutions can be built for. And, you know, freeing that up actually means bringing down red tape, in fact. I think that the two main topics being mentioned today are healthcare and building. Building, obviously, you know, determined by land authorities and such, and healthcare determined by ministries of health. Now, we obviously can't put our populations at risk by developing solutions which are medically unsound. However, I do believe that there are many societal healthcare endeavors which are definitely going to be of benefit to society and will be rolled out by companies and entrepreneurs alike, and sort of find their Facebook way into our lives. And I think if we get that freedom of operation going, we'll be surprised what we can do together. And how that crystals into profit, it'll find its way as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So it could start as something that may not have method and madness. Correct.
Right. Can I just add very quickly? I mean, first of all, I'm not a think tank. I actually run a business, but some thinking happens. My business is thinking. But one of the mottos for the business Future Moves is embrace uncertainty. And I think what happens in societies as they mature, and maybe another impediment, is success. When we become successful, we start to seek certainty and run away from uncertainty. We try to deconstruct uncertainty out of our future. And of course, it's impossible, and we make a lot of mal-policy decisions because we're trying to avoid uncertainty. And when we look at people who embrace uncertainty as threats, as somehow malcontent or maladjusted or just defects. But in fact, these are the people that are going to be your solution providers in the future. So rather than having them be the minority and marginalized, we should try to make embracing uncertainty the majority preoccupation and part of the mainstream. And that's an education issue. But it's also an issue of leadership, because if the leaders can live with uncertainty and embrace it and allow the people to fluctuate in an uncertain space without trying to find a solution to everything, then I think we're going to be preparing our people to be future ready. Because we don't prepare people to be future ready, and therefore don't come up with the solutions for the future by taking care of everything for them. And I think this speaks to where you were coming from. So when I think of leaders, I don't just think of political leaders, but really leaders that come up in all different spheres of society.
Great point. Thank you, Chris. Viswa, you started talking about people with this question, and we heard about leaders. We heard about perhaps the intrinsic motivation of sustainable cities might drive us. It's not just the business side. We heard about the problem itself and maybe unleashing the masses in that madness. You know, I might share maybe some microcosms of some others that might give us some models to think about. I'll start with National Instruments. We got to work with them, not on sustainable cities, but on education. In the US, engineering is becoming less and less a popular area to go into. And National Instruments as an engineering company is very worried about that. And so they worked with the political forces, they invested, et cetera, and they found that wasn't enough. And so a model that they adopted that we got to work on them with, and this is actually with Lego, with some European partners that are obviously very important, was bringing Lego Mindstorms into the primary school classrooms. But not just bringing that technology in there, they actually gave release time 1 day a week, or 1 day a week per month, to their employees to go in the classroom as well. And it was counted as their real time. They didn't have to go back and get their extra work done, but they were actually in the classroom, in the business day, and so they were changing the model. What if we took every company in Singapore, 1 day a week for every month, every employee was focused on solving a sustainability problem in the company, in the office, in the city? What difference might we have as we approach that? So that's a microcosm of another area. Sembcorp in Singapore we got to work with. For the last 14 to 16 years, they've been holding an innovation carnival, long before innovation was vogue. And what the managing director shared with me, one of their successes there, is they actually take each department and they give them a pot of money. I won't share how much it is, but it's significant. And when they give it to them, they don't put KPIs on them. They don't put any audit on them except that you can't use it for misuse. And they said, innovate with this. All we care is that you tell us what you're doing with it. We don't care what that is. I got to visit their carnival this year. It's fabulous. Can you imagine, again, every company, every organization, every private and public entity having an innovation carnival, but maybe around these type of problems, what type of change we might have. A third one is our students at, students at SUTD. We have a group, the Opportunity Lab, where they cast problems to our students. These are problems in the Philippines with water, with housing, with healthcare, in India and in other countries. They just offer the problem with very little resources to the students. And then the students are attracted like magnets to it. They don't need an economic benefit. They want to make a difference in people's lives. Exactly. And then they bring a model that says you're not going to go visit these countries for a week or 5 days or 2 weeks because nothing will happen. You'll have a great experience in your life, but nothing's going to happen. Instead, they take a model and say, we're going to have you for a year, 2 years, or 3 years. We're going to go visit these communities and get a relationship first. Then we're going to embark on design problems together. And you're not leaving technology behind. What you're leaving is design processes and design behind, so people can solve the problems themselves. Those are three microcosms that might give us some models to think about.
What I'm hearing, I think we are getting some recurring themes. One is the term leadership. I think that is clearly paramount. But what I'm also hearing is that there is a need for us to democratize leadership. Do you agree? That's what we're hearing. Because the quintessential, the typical definition of leadership refers to those who are appointed or anointed. But what I'm hearing is you should democratize the definition of leadership, broaden it, widen it, so that anyone can be a leader in this space. And that is true empowerment, right? So we need to be a lot less structured and defined about who is the leader and who therefore calls the shots and demands which tune is to be played. Because when you have that, you're not going to have true innovation. Because true innovation has to, as the other term which I can't stand, is ecosystem, right? But we've been talking about ecosystem for 2 decades. But what ecosystem are you talking about? You see the same players continuing to lead the ecosystem. That is, in my view, not necessarily ecosystem. Ecosystem, the test of real ecosystem is when the small creatures actually make big outcomes happen. Otherwise, it's not an ecosystem. So one of the things we're hearing is broaden, widen, and democratize the definition of leadership. The other strain of, the other idea we are hearing is move away from efficiency-driven to effectiveness. So when you are efficiency-driven, you talk in terms of KPIs, and you need outcomes you need to measure. But I think we need to allow for a certain amount of inefficiency in the process for real innovation to happen, right? Jan, you made the point. Chris, you made the point in your presentation as well. And the third point that's coming through, which is the final thing that I would like to throw back to you, is the whole point about students and youth. Instead of continuing to try and teach old dogs new tricks, and we all know how difficult that is, maybe we should decide to write off entire generations and focus, and that includes my generation, and focus a lot more on young people. Focus a lot more on young people and stop paying just lip service to empowering young people, but truly empower them. Young people like students. Put the money where the mouth is and give them the power to create. And allow ourselves the opportunity to constantly be surprised. But it takes courage. Question is, do societies have the courage to trust our young people with responsibility for change? Change that we adults obviously have failed to achieve. Do we have the courage? Let's start with whether Netherlands and Singapore, you believe, has the courage to entrust our young people to go out there and make what we failed to happen.
You know, I would actually challenge also the comment here about empowering young people, because I actually believe worldwide young people have been empowered. Majorly so by the decrease of transaction cost in building HTML websites, by building apps on mobile phones, by the access to data, which is internationally, you know, there are many data repositories where students and any designer or any technologist, IT programmer alike can drag information out there and develop solutions. I think I moved back to Singapore actually a year ago. Before that, I was in the US for 3 years, and I met several people who had simply built an app. One did an app to facilitate university entrance exams and to facilitate university entrance programs, and this guy was now driving a Bentley because his app took off. So, you know, the transaction cost, the amount of effort is to be expelled for many types of the innovation we're looking at is already at a very low level. So I believe that's already there. A second area of which we see that the transaction costs are decreasing are, for example, the human genome. I think that cost $200 million originally to map the first human genome, and right now with 23andMe and what have you, you're there for under $1,000, and lo and behold, in 5 years, it's going to be $99.99. It's really going to be very cheap to do so. So what we actually have done, I think, is already pulled down all the boundaries there. What we haven't done is allowed them to build businesses, the youth build business, allow them to find an angle to market, or even allow them to go into riskier endeavors in healthcare, in certain areas which are of society's risk. And I think that's where we have to really think about who is determining what the risk profile is of a certain solution, of a healthcare app. Because right now, to get some of these things approved, whether in Singapore, in Holland, or in the US, it's a nightmare to get things approved, whereas they are inherently beneficial to society. And I believe by pulling those kind of boundaries down, we will automatically empower everyone, and not just the elderly, or the youth. We'll empower anyone with a brilliant idea and a mind to go do so.
So I hear you say, use the word allow. Do we allow them to so on? By that, I believe you're referring to the impediments that come in the form of bureaucracy.
Correct.
Right? And maybe that's the role of government, not so much to come up with solutions, but to remove the blocks, to allow for people to go out there and innovate.
Correct. And I think that would be the best. Even entrepreneurship, sponsoring entrepreneurs would be one of the major things. Singapore does a brilliant job through, both EDB, IDA sponsors a whole group of people. I think they do an excellent job to do so. But now getting them to market and actually helping them to that next step, that's where I still see too many blocks. And I think, Chris, you'll probably know that even more, that you've got a whole bunch of brilliant people in rooms, and it's just getting that extra step. And there's also companies like Philips and I suppose like, anyone, Unilever or Shells, that actually would love to sponsor these kind of things. However, it's getting that connection, which is a big impediment.
Yeah, you talked about efficiency and effectiveness, but I think that's missing the point. What we should be promoting is experimentation and a positive attitude towards experimentation, because that's the route for innovation, it's a route for change, it's a route for discovering and seeing things in a different perspective. And that means being able to resource failure instead of resourcing success. Right now in Singapore in particular, we've got a history of deciding something is going to work, then we'll back you. So we buy into successes and we stay away from failures, which is why we haven't created any great companies, but we have shares in a lot of really great companies around the world. That's a very expensive way to be successful. And it's not really a sustainable way. We have to find a way to resource failure in order to grow experimentation, and that's the seed on which you're going to find future companies, and the future companies are going to create the future solutions. So the market does a really good job of that in some countries where there's critical mass, but we don't really have critical mass. And second, some cultures do a very good job, like the United States, or some parts of the United States. We don't, because we're hesitant. We embrace uncertainty, we seek certainty because we've come to see ourselves as stable and predictable, and those are our selling points. You press any Singaporean on the nose, and they'll come up with 5-minute spiel on our predictability and stability and all that sort of thing. In fact, we should be embracing instability, at least where it counts, in order for us to be able to be motivated to do new things and go forward in a new direction. What I'd like to see Singapore in the future is that we are a serial startup. The entire country is a serial startup that has to recreate itself every 10 to 15 years. That's going to upset some people, but it's also going to take people in new directions throughout a very, very long life, a life that is going to get longer and longer. The lifespan is now 82 years. 30 years ago, it was only about 56 years. So if you're going to live that long, don't be bored. And the best way not to be bored is to change. And then I think once we get our heads around that, we'll be less afraid of trying. One last point I'd like to make is this: that it's possible to overemphasize on use. I think what we should be emphasizing is a youthful mindset that everybody should have and can have no matter what their age is, because our brains are wonderful, malleable things. It's only when we start to think that this is my role, this is what I've done, this is what I've become, and this is all I can be, that suddenly you're no longer useful. So I think it's not your body, it's your mind, and it's your heart. And we can all change that and make ourselves a useful country, even as we get gray and mobile. Chris.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, well, I really like the idea about a country having a startup every 50 years ago. Again, reset the button and start again. But I agree on both previous speakers that we have fantastic young people already there, and we have an infrastructure that they can express themselves very easily. It's called the web infrastructure, so that's great, absolutely. But we are talking about, I think, a privileged group of people who has a study or studied at universities. but we also need to look at the unprivileged, I think, because there's a lot of creativity, ideas, and motivation to catch these guys and girls. And so maybe I can talk a little bit again about our farm idea. You know, so there is a relationship between the countryside and the cities. It has been for many ages ago. I mean, cities could grow because of the health of the countryside, right? So when we started the idea to design a floating farm, and we said, let's have young children, the unprivileged, adopt a cow and benefit from the milk it produces, right? So they earn money for it. And we started talking to young children in the cities, and we said, do you like the idea? Yes, yes, yes. So who wants to have a cow? I do. So, okay, we thought, how many cows do we need to bring in the city? Way too much, because everybody wanted to earn money with it, you know? So then they said, okay, but outside the cities, there are many cows to go. So all these children wanted to chase after cows in the countryside, you know? And that was exactly the idea, to have them, give them a chance as well. So I think we need to mobilize also the unprivileged, because there are a lot of idea and power there as well.
Thank you.
And maybe just to underscore what we've heard is experimentation, I agree emphatically. And I think experimentation, fail fast, fail often, for success, not just to fail, is what experimentation I embrace. Youth, of course, I have a little bit of youth in me because I get to be around youth all day at the university. So I'm privileged to be in that. So I agree on the youth side, but I also would say youth is in every generation. We have to learn how to tap into it. And I do think it'll take every generation to get there. And while there is the saying of old dogs, maybe not new tricks, I actually think there is a youth in everyone that if we tap into it, we're going to find lots of new tricks that we'd never perceived before.
This is one point that I am delighted to be contradicted on. Given the fact that I've got some gray hairs myself, you know, we've got about 5 minutes for Q&A. Anyone out there? No speeches, please. Just quick comments or questions. Yes. If you could give us your name.
My name is John Powers. I'm from the Kuan Youth Center for Innovative Cities. I really like some of the ideas about democratization of innovation and innovative processes, and they're not necessarily needing to be always an economic incentive for innovative pushing. But still, in the dismal world of economic science, will tell you there needs to be innovation. So simply, there needs to be incentives. So my question to you is really about the relationship between open source and intellectual property protection. Increasingly in the United States, there's a lot of movement to suggest that IP protection is simply too strong, and that there are numerous examples out there about open source innovation that have produced superior technology. So I just wanted, in the spirit of the democratization concept, which I thought was a very good one, how do you perceive that trade-off?
Great question. Well, let me see who would be a good person to answer this question. I'm going to pick someone. I'm going to pick Peter. You are the entrepreneur.
I really hope to have some more time for this one, actually.
Actually, you don't, you know.
I understand that. I understand that. But I'm a bit sleepy, you know.
Why do you think I asked you? Okay.
No, it's a really good question. Well, we started to design without thinking about the IP, actually. Because we didn't want to think about the business model behind it and to sell the knowledge. And I understand the question completely. But it was not our first driver. And maybe that's the answer as well. And maybe it's a bit childish to not think about the business behind it on the long term. But it's not our driver. So I'm not the right guy to ask the question, because we said, no, let's just design things and get all people, specialists from their field in. I don't like to work too much within the people within the company from a hierarchy perspective.
Yeah.
I want to create teams that have competences because of their competence, not because of they're on the payroll, you know. So we thought, no, let's create and get as much people we can to design things and not bother in the first place about IP yet. So maybe it's coming later, but not now. It's not our first driver, actually.
Yeah, you want to comment on it?
Yeah, you know, I think it's a fabulous question, first off, especially because the company I work for, Philips, is obviously an inventor of the CD. We had the luxury of IP protection for over 20 years. We work in the medical field in which medical advancements are developed so that we deliver improved healthcare to the general population, but it's also protected. By chance, by the way, Philips does share its IP with a broader set of companies because we feel there's a societal need to share that kind of IP. However, I think IP is not the only way to protect what you invent. I think there's time to market. To be the quickest time to market is one of the quickest ways to build something. I think building capabilities in Peter's knowledge base and his whole organization, I'm sure has superior capabilities. To also talk about the water management that we had here, I mean, Holland has been fighting water for a couple of centuries right now. I think worldwide we know Holland is the undisputed capability leader in the water management. So I think IP is really good, but I don't think we should rely on it to protect our business models unless we do something which is so specific and it treats one specific thing that we're able to say, okay, this is what we're going to protect. But I think most of these, especially in the digital age right now, I really struggle to see how IP can be protected outright for a long, long time. I think it'll be superseded by differences. I don't know if it answers anything.
No, but I think a lot. I don't think it's possible for us to actually answer the question fully. But I think the question itself is great food for thought, because in many societies there is this tension that we are all trying to deal with, right? To let 1,000 flowers bloom, at the same time protect those who've been working very hard to come up with something that is precious to them. So how do we strike the balance? Maybe governments should start thinking about what might be their role in terms of providing a framework or to help to nudge the liberalization of IP. Maybe there should be some global initiatives. But I don't think this forum necessarily needs to come up with the answer, but it's a great question for us to think about. 2 more questions, then we wrap. Wow, that's a lot of questions. Okay, the lady. Yeah, in front, yes.
Hi, I'm Suwai from the Straits Times. I've learned a lot from you about what you hope can happen in terms of government, private sector, people on the ground. But I still have concerns about how much all the experts are educating those on the ground so that they are able to ask, not to say the right questions, but clear and coherent, questions. You say unleashing the masses, right, Chris? But people can't unleash their passion until they know exactly what it is they should be talking about. So could you share with me, maybe your endeavors or insights into how you're trying to educate the masses so that they can ask the right questions of all of you? Thanks very much.
Well, that's a key part. The education part's a key part. I mean, these forums are one. I mean, what TEDx, maybe it's just by default. That's a great forum for a starting point. Another forum is, sort of what universities are all about. In a very short time frame, in a very short lifespan, which is 4 years, we put people out with new perspectives, and they continually roll out. So that's the common university. And I think that's being more and more effective. If you survey people that might have come out of universities 10 years ago versus now, maybe even 5 years ago versus now, you're going to find completely different perspectives on sustainability and what we might do. So that's the known formats, and I think that those are working okay. But again, I think it's about bringing together communities. And so how do we as a political structure, how do we as companies, how do we as private organizations and public organizations offer forums for people to come together across organizations? I think universities attempt to do that. We have forums, we have seminars, we have projects that we attempt to go through those. I think everybody might look and invest in that because the education will naturally happen. Because it'll be peer-to-peer, it'll be because it's driven by a common interest, and then it won't be just about putting out perhaps what we call old fish, which is papers and books, etc. But I think that's what it's going to take, in my opinion, is education to be owned by every entity, not just the entities we have currently.
Yeah, let me just quickly respond to that. I take issue with the issue of asking the right questions. I think what it's important to do is give people the right to ask questions. There are no wrong questions. The second is, how do you get people to ask questions? And that's, I think, to change our way of education, the way we look at education, where it's a right brain and the left brain. I'm teaching people science and technology, and I'm teaching people arts and humanities. In fact, one of the best ways to stimulate your imagination is to embrace arts and humanities, to look at the media, to look at plays, to look at movies, and you go there to do what? To stimulate your imagination. And the actors in these fields, the leaders in these fields, can cross-pollinate, stimulate, catalyze, and motivate people with hardcore skill sets in science and technology to see the future in a different way and start to ask questions in a different way. So I think we should stop trying to see education as either or, and education is really just simply education. And education is fundamentally about learning to learn, because you're going to stop schooling at some point, but your life is your school. And so I strongly encourage people to learn rather than simply learn.
And maybe we should also learn to unlearn. Yeah, I think it's a very important skill set in the 21st century, to learn to unlearn a lot of the things that we have allowed to become formula. Goes back to your earlier point, Devadas. I will allow the two more questions, the gentleman and the lady behind.
Thank you very much. Also, the panel discussion is very interesting. Coming back to your craft, technology and meaning.
Sorry, could we have your name, please?
Michael Bolt from NXP Semiconductors.
Thank you.
It used to be part of Philips engineering company. And what it interests me about, if you want radical change and if you want the heart of somebody in innovation or in moving, they have to understand the meaning of what they're doing. And what strikes me is we don't teach, especially in engineering, we don't teach our engineers, even in a work environment, to translate it into a bigger meaning. They're very much fixed. I'm quite interested, they're fixed on a lower level, and they miss the bigger picture sometimes. And I'm wondering if that could help us moving forward to really put effort into teaching people to first translate it to what is this doing for society, what is it doing for your company, what is it doing for your department, what is it doing for yourself, instead of just answering the first question of my boss has asked me to do. And it comes back to for your radical change, actually.
Right, thank you, Michael. Before we go to the panelists, I'll get the second question. Thank you.
Hi, Janice Koh. I'm an actor and also currently a nominated member of Parliament. Thank you very much to the panel. It's been very stimulating. My question is basically, who leads this change? I think to have an innovative city, it requires great risk-taking, a lot of investment both in time and money, and embracing of uncertain outcomes, but at the same time, the challenge of bringing people and the population along with you. I think in Singapore, in the last 40 years, our government has done that extremely well. The benchmark has been now very high, that we are sort of reached a point where it's so much harder for government to continue leading this change because people it's just so much more challenging, I suppose, to put it that way. I mean, I'm interested to know in the Netherlands, where this is the sense, where does this change, where does the seed of change come from? Is it business, or is it government, or is it both? Because in Singapore, I think it's still very much in government and not so much in the private sector yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. In the interest of time, maybe we'll have you, each one of you, respond to the two questions and also make a wrap-up comment. Right? So we'll start with a gentleman from Holland. So, Jan?
We have two.
Yeah, two gentlemen, yeah.
Okay, let me first respond to the second question. I mean, I think, it's a very good question, and I don't think the answer is to make any type of choice with that. Because unleashing the innovative self, unleashing the potentials of every individual lies within the freedom of thought they are welcome to have and the freedom of education they have. So I think also being a Dutchman and looking at how Holland has solved things over time, and having lived in the US in the past couple of years, I in fact see that education is probably the key to allow people to do things, but then it's actually to free them up, to free every individual up to go and be able to become an entrepreneur. So not to go through the whole life way of working at a big company and or going to university and then doing the standard kind of thing, or go into government. I think if I look at the people I meet in Singapore in my current role, I meet a lot with the EDB, I meet a lot with other government organizations, LTA, URA, and 99% of the people I see are fabulous individuals who shouldn't be at those organizations. They should be building companies. They should be growing into the new Singapore, into the new commercial organization, and they'll be exporting their inventions to everywhere in ASEAN Pacific and other developed nations as well. So, I mean, those are the winners of the country. And I don't want to single them out at all. I think Singapore has a great education system. I had the pleasure of being here in my youth as well, and have spent some time at Singaporean schools. They're in the top 10 schools. There's 2 of them are in Singapore, worldwide schools. So I think Singapore's got it right from the education side, and I think there doesn't need to be a choice, government or companies. I think there needs to be a choice, give people the freedom to innovate and freedom to grow. I think that's the only way forward, and Singapore will then export a lot of its inventions.
Okay, well, indeed, great questions indeed, and we see a lot of shifts already going on in the world, I think. So much happening in the world. If you look at the Arabian Spring that is happening, I mean, you see power is moving in the world from the hierarchy to the squares. So there is already a shift going on to express yourself. And you see that the same happening in the political environment right now. So we had our elections in France last Sunday, which gives a huge shift. And we had the same in the Netherlands about 2 weeks ago. And that brought also a huge shift in the political environments. And actually the answer of the people said, we need to move to more education and science and freedom, which makes actually our Minister of Science and Education maybe the most important minister right now we have. So fantastic that she was in the audience. But I see a shift happening on a natural way already in the world.
I won't chat both questions. Both questions are fantastic, and we might have even heard about the leadership side in multiple ways. But let me at least deal with meaning as this passion of mine. I'm a product design dude. I love design. But you're right, as an engineer, when I've embraced it, we tend to focus on the technology, the local market, meeting our metrics as they come out, and we might lose meaning in that process, or we don't at least see it in the broader scale of meaning. But I'll tell you, as I've been at SUTD, and I'll be a little biased here, we don't have walls, we don't have colleges, we don't have schools, we don't have departments. And we're putting people together, social scientists, architects, hardcore scientists, engineers next to each other, and fascinating things are happening. As we translate on interfaces, meaning is always the key concept that we're talking about. Very rarely are we talking about that metric or this next market, but it's about interfaces. So my simple answer, and it's a very hard thing to achieve, is we bring groups together at interfaces. Meaning will be derived from that. And it's how companies and organizations can do that, to set up their organizations to pull that off. Maybe, and I know you don't like the term, but maybe in this ecosystem, or what a new ecosystem of small players might be. That would be my answer, because I've learned so much from all the other people I interact with.
Thank you. Let me tackle both questions with the same response, which is, and it's particular to Singapore, which I think we suffer from pattern recognition disability. That we're used to seeing government in a certain way, people in a certain way, our leaders in a certain way, how we produce things in a certain way, defining success in a certain way. So going forward, we need to be able to remake patterns. And remaking patterns is not a function of one person suddenly miraculously like Noah or coming out there and taking you through the flood. It's about societal change. And the great thing about Singapore, as with Netherlands, is what democracy is. And in a democracy, you get the government you deserve because you vote them in. And so it's a process that allows for change. It allows for evolution because new crops of people will come up to deal with new challenges, and the people will find that they get support if their ideas are compelling enough and if they are compelling enough. So I think that's important. But for that to happen, you need individuals to take ownership. Not government own everything, own the problem, own the solution, and own the resources, and own the right to tell you whether you can participate. I think what will happen as we go forward, and what should happen, is you should have smaller government. Government with limits, government with constraints, and people with a bigger space to play in. And they'll make mistakes. And mistakes are part of learning, mistakes are part of changing, and mistakes are part of risk-taking. And we've got to be able to trust that the mistakes we make are the price we pay to get better. Yeah. Not trying to find the right answer at every instance and every turn. So I think that's really the journey that we're on, not just us, but lots of countries around the world. But perhaps Singapore has to accelerate on that journey a little faster because the challenges are moving faster than our changes are. But we're changing, and so I'm hopeful.
Thank you. And with that, I'll just wrap by highlighting 3 key ideas that I feel has surfaced in today's discussion. The first thing is really what all of us have been talking about, is really the need to broaden and democratize the definition of leadership. It's not just about people with titles, it's not just about government, it's about anyone who wants to lead, right? So let's move away from a title-driven leadership paradigm to leader-driven leadership paradigm. People out there who may want to lead, give them a chance. So that's the first point that's coming through loud and clear. So it even touches on the point about proprietary things. There are other people who want to lead, who want to do things. The second point that comes through very clearly is to engage people. And the word here, we keep hearing the word educate. But educate suggests that one party has a greater authority and knowledge than the other. Maybe the word we should be using is socialize, not educate. Educate is a bad word in this new ecosystem. It is about socializing people and allowing for a lot more of ground-up initiatives and ideas. And in the process, we may have to trade off a little bit about speed and efficiency, but allow people to start moving with the tide. That's engagement and socialization. That's a second broad idea. The third idea is about experimenting with a youthful mind and heart. You know, thank you, Devadas, for reminding me about the youthfulness that might still be residing in me. Right? But it is so true, isn't it? It is experimenting with that zeal, that innocence, that zest, and not allowing that to be clouded or to be eroded, to be hindered or inhibited. That is so loud and clear coming through. And what all this means at the end of the day is when we talk about ecosystem, we all know that an ecosystem is what is needed. But when we talk about ecosystem, the image that comes to my mind is this huge banyan tree. But nothing grows under it. So when you have a huge banyan tree, no matter how hard you try, you will not have an ecosystem. So maybe the banyan tree, as Devadas said, need not be as big, so that you will have undergrowth, which is what makes an ecosystem happen. And I like to end by reminding ourselves of what my good friend Albert Einstein once said: imagination is greater than knowledge. Thank you very much. Join me in thanking the panelists.